Hello and welcome. My name is Ian Rogan and I'm the MBA Program Director here at Said Business School. On behalf of the University of Oxford Said Business School, African Studies Center, and the Oxford Africa Business Alliance, it is my honor to welcome His Excellency John Mahama. His Excellency. His Excellency was the fourth President of the Republic of Ghana between 2013 and 2017. Prior to that, he served as Vice President of Ghana from 2009 to 2012. His Excellency made history by being the first President of Ghana to serve in all levels of political office, including as a Member of Parliament, then Minister, and eventually President of Ghana. He is a communications expert, historian and writer, and the presidential candidate of Ghana's National Democratic Congress for the 2020 presidential election. Following His Excellency's lecture, he will join Professor Wale Adebanwi, Director of the African Studies Center and Rhodes Professor of Race Relations, in discussion where the audience will be able to direct their questions to Mr. Mahama. Please join me in welcoming His Excellency.
Yeah, there. Let me just see. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I was here in 2015 at the Oxford Africa Conference to speak on the topic, Africa, a continent on the move, people, politics, and business across borders. That opportunity 4 years ago to actively engage a broad range of stakeholders was mutually beneficial. And I believe that today's lecture will be even more rewarding. A few of my compatriots have had the honor, as I stated in 2015, of being trained in this prestigious institution of learning. Professor Kofi Abrifabozia, former Prime Minister of Ghana, the former President John Agyekum Kufuor, one of my predecessors, a legal luminary, Mr. Chachu Chikata, and a governance expert and university lecturer, Professor Kwamina Ahoy. I did not have such a distinguished opportunity, but I can assure you I received a reasonably good education from Ghana's premier university, the University of Ghana at Legon, of which I'm very proud. I thank you for the opportunity to be back here again at Oxford. I'd like to pay a few acknowledgements to Mr. Ian Rogan, the MBA Director, Mr. Wale Adebanwi, Director of African Studies Center, and Tammy Brophy, Chair of African Alliance at the Said Business School. I want to thank you for the collaboration and invitation to share my thoughts on democracy and elections in contemporary Africa. As a historian, the temptation is great for me to begin my exposition from the theories on the state of nature by the great thinkers Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, as they apply to the social contract and the beginnings of governance in human society. But such a venture will require the whole day to accomplish. In my allotted time of 30 minutes, I'll carry out a brief discourse on current developments in respect of democracy and elections in Africa, and hope to have the opportunity to expatiate more in the question and answer session. Democracy, ladies and gentlemen, is an antithesis of dictatorship, authoritarianism, tyranny, or despotism. Democracy is a system that promotes the participation of the citizens in how they are governed. It reposes sovereignty in the people on whose behalf leadership is exercised. It is based on the rule of law, respect for rights and freedoms of citizens. Elections are an instrument for exercising choice of the people on who occupies an office of leadership. Elections are therefore an exercise of the people's right of choice as to who their leaders at various levels of governance should be, often for a period defined by law. But make no mistake, elections are conducted as well under authoritarian regimes. However, the system of elections under such circumstances are rigged to achieve a predetermined outcome. Democracy allows an environment that promotes creativity and innovation. People will always make a choice for a system of government that allows them to express themselves freely and be able to have a say in how they are governed. Africa has experimented with different systems of government since gaining political independence from colonial rule. But three main eras can be distinguished. The immediate post-independence era of one-party rule, the era of military dictatorships, and from the turn of the millennium, what one may call the era of African democratic spring. This period, the African democratic spring, saw a blossoming of constitutional rule and democratic governments across the continent. From the early 1990s, as a result of pressure from their own citizens, civil society organizations, external actors, and the general global environment, many African countries began to open up and return to constitutional democracy. Constitutional rule replaced military dictatorships. Elections became the norm rather than the exception. Respect for human rights and freedoms, an expanded media space, all became the trend to follow. Even pseudo-democracies which still had autocratic leaderships were forced to join the train and allowed elections to take place. That often turned out results as high as 95% endorsements of the regime in question. Recent events, however, reveal that citizens have the ability and the will to force democratic change. Little sparks can trigger a chain of events that end up dislodging even the most entrenched dictator. When the people have suffered enough, cowardly citizens who earlier fled at the least sign of the heavy hand of repression become so outraged, they embrace death and injury as a worthy sacrifice in the confrontation with dictatorship. Removal of subsidies last December shot up the price of bread, a staple food item in Sudan. Spontaneous protests began in Atbara and quickly spread across the country. As the protests continued, the protesters gained strength in numbers, and not even the brutality of the security services could douse the fire that had been lit. A similar fire was lit in Algeria when the ailing president announced that he was going to run for a fifth term in office. Spontaneous protests erupted, leading to a collapse of the regime. Earlier in the Arab Spring, uprisings of the people swept strongmen Ben Ali, Hosni Mubarak, and Muammar Gaddafi out of power. In Gambia, strongman Yahya Jammeh eventually had to go into exile, following initial attempts to challenge the results of an election that had given victory to his opponent, Adama Barrow. To consolidate democratic developments in Africa, the continental body, the African Union, in its attempt to capture the will and desire of the people, provided a robust normative structure to guide member states. In its mission of democracy promotion, the AU built an expansive framework and adopted protocols, mechanisms, and institutions for implementation. These mechanisms and institutions have been instrumental in strengthening democratic governance in the AU member states and have aided those in transition from conflict and authoritarian regimes. This is a departure from the predecessor Organization of African Unity, which had a charter in 1963 embracing the doctrine of non-interference in the internal affairs of member states. Furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, the AU Constitutive Act embraces a new doctrine of non-indifference to human rights abuses within the territory of another AU member state. The Act and the 2007 African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance are the continental body's framework for the protection and promotion of democracy. Cumulatively, these tools have emboldened the AU in its democracy, promotion, and good governance agenda. The democratic spring in Africa has impacted positively on many African countries. Over the last decade, average GDP growth in many countries has ranged between 4 and 6%. Many countries have seen an upsurge in foreign direct investments. Africa has enjoyed the fastest growth in telecommunications and information technology during this period. The African middle class has prospered and has been one of the fastest growing in the world. Per capita income has increased significantly for many African states. The successful implementation of the Millennium Development Goals has seen the achievements of reduction of extreme hunger and malnutrition. Many African countries have seen an increase in primary school enrollment and also the achievement of gender parity in enrollment. Average life expectancy has improved. Widespread use of vaccinations has seen a significant drop in under 5 mortality, and many children are surviving and thriving. All these positive developments are the dividends of democracy. As a chairman of the Tana High-Level Forum on Security in Africa, I had the privilege last week in Bahir Dar, Ethiopia, to present a summary of the report on the state of peace and security in Africa in 2018. The report noted some successes achieved by Africans in the quest for peace and good governance in that year. The report noted the holding of elections in 27 countries and the successful transfer of power. It noted an expansion of space for civil society engagement despite the considerable risks the operators face. The report also noted the growing involvement of young people braving the odds stacked against them in the political space to join politics, seek elective positions in parliament or in public office. The youth were also taking advantage of the digital revolution to put developmental issues of concern to them on the front burner of national, continental, and global agenda. As game changers in many respects, youth activism and visa liberalization are making the free movement of people, goods, and services across the continent easier. They are in turn producing impulses capable of improving regional integration and cross-border trade, and also significantly contributing to overall GDP growth. The year 2018 also saw all but 3 African countries meet and sign the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which recently achieved the record threshold of the 22 ratifications required for coming into effect. All the above indicates significant strides towards political and economic liberation of the people in Africa, and paint a picture of a continent definitely on course in delivering on the will of the people. Ladies and gentlemen, for example, if this free trade agreement is faithfully implemented and the arithmetic works out as planned, it may just be what the continent needs to set itself on the pathway towards achieving the African Union Agenda 2063, which is an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa. This prospect is achievable, and the signals are positive. Notwithstanding the significant gains made, African democracy is still fragile and faces many challenges. The dividends of democracy are still not immediately tangible to the African population. Major inequality exists, and the fruits of economic growth are not shared fairly down the class chain. Many vulnerable groups are losing out, while the affluence of the growing prosperous classes is being flaunted in their faces. Social safety nets have not been enough to stem the growing divide between the rich and the poor. Citizens begin to question the need to exercise their franchise during elections when they feel no tangible improvements in their lives. This could commonly be referred as democracy fatigue. Africa is a continent in a hurry. Africa does not have the luxury of time if democracy must thrive. Former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Haile Mariam Desalegn, said democracy is not all about elections. He was right. Democracy is about improvement in people's lives. It is about access to social services. It is about jobs and employment. It is about social justice and the fight against corruption. It is about the establishment of strong institutions. Africa has a burgeoning population. Economic growth is not translating into jobs as fast as is necessary to keep up with population growth. It is estimated that about 12 million graduates are churned out every year from tertiary institutions in Africa. And yes, less than 5 million sustainable job places are available for them each year. African nations need to accelerate growth and ensure there's a greater diffusion of the fruits of growth down the class chain. While democracy, elections, free speech, and a vibrant media are the greatest assets in the fight against graft and corruption, perceptions of corruption can heighten in a democracy because there's increased open discussion of acts of malfeasance that create an impression that the canker is on the increase. This heightened perception of corruption, added to the fact that the wheels of justice in a democracy grind very slowly, often lead to a sense of longing for the unconstitutional times when persons suspected of corruption could be dealt with without any regard to the respect for their human rights. Low participation of women in elective office due to socio-cultural factors continue to be an indictment on Africa's democratic development. In most countries, women form the majority of the population and yet are severely underrepresented in elective and public office. In my own country, Ghana, while women form about 51% of the population, the majority, the highest percentage of seats held by women in our parliament is 12.7% in the 2017 parliament. And this is up from 10.9% in the 2013 parliament. In many countries also, the lack of effective decentralization of power and resources means that development is lopsided and many geographic areas find themselves marginalized and deprived. This creates fertile grounds for all kinds of social agitation and dissension, and in extreme cases, insurgency. Decentralization and a fair redistribution of wealth are the most effective guarantees for stability and security in a democracy. Democratic governments must therefore go hand in hand with political and economic empowerment of local populations. Lack of continuity in planning and development because of frequent transfers of power could also hobble investment and development, especially in situations where incoming administrations renege on fulfilling agreements on and obligations entered into by its predecessor. Other areas of challenges in electoral systems exist, and we need to look at that considering their implication for democracy. The increased use of IT in elections has become topical. The use of IT in results transmission and the possibility of hacking have created new fears about the manipulation of results. Examples of this can be found in the recent elections in Ghana, Kenya, and Sierra Leone. During the last presidential election in Ghana, the Electoral Commission directed its staff to stop using the electronic transmission system to communicate results to the tallying center because the system had been compromised. The result had to therefore be tallied manually, leading to attendant tensions in the delay of the announcement of the final results. As I speak, I'm not aware that the Electoral Commission has carried out any investigation into what compromised their IT system. And even if they have, we, the stakeholders, the political parties, have not been briefed on what caused the corruption of the system. In the interest of transparency, it is important for Ghanaians to understand what happened before we go into another election. In Kenya, I was impressed at the sophistication of the Kenya Integrated Election Management System, a system which sought to transmit results, election results, directly from the polling center to the front-end server of the Kenyan Electoral Commission. The same equipment that served to verify voters was the same device for entering the tally after voting and transmitting the results. On the day, this system became the bone of contention and created such tension that it threatened the stability of Kenya's democracy. In the end, good sense prevailed. As we advised, Raila Odinga, the opposition candidate, filed a motion in court claiming that the Kenyan Integrated Electoral Management System had been manipulated by the insertion of some algorithms to alter the results in favor of the incumbent. The hearing at the Kenyan Supreme Court favored Mr. Odinga, and a rerun was ordered. Of course, Mr. Odinga's decision to withdraw from the rerun made it a one-horse race, giving victory to President Kenyatta. In Sierra Leone, after no candidate secured enough votes to claim a first-round victory, a runoff was organized between the two leading contenders. In a 10-second round election, crisis was sparked when during the counting, the incumbent government candidate claimed that the opposition had conspired with the Electoral Commission to rig the tallying system in its favor. Of course, this created a tense standoff. They demanded a scrapping of the EC's electronic system and its replacement with simple Excel spreadsheets. It shows how complicated technology can create disputes. In the end, we, the observers, 10 mediators, advised to have a parallel spreadsheet tabulation done alongside the electronic tallying system and, of course, the snail-pace manual transmission, so that at the end of the process, a comparison could be made of all the results and give assurance to everybody that they had been treated fairly. To the relief of a nation sitting on tenterhooks, results were announced with victory going to the opposition candidate. We huddled recently in Abeokuta at the Obasanjo Presidential Library with political leaders, electoral officials, IT experts, and of course, hackers. We had hackers in attendance to discuss the use of IT systems in elections and how to avoid election disputes arising out of their use. Happily, I'm pleased to announce that the ECOWAS has taken up the challenge from there and is set to organize an in-depth discussion with all stakeholders in West Africa on the use of electronic systems in elections. Ladies and gentlemen, the rise of the new media is also significant, has a significant impact on Africa's democracy and the choices made by our people. The use of bots, avatars, and trolling factories allow various interest groups to influence the decision of the people in elections. Indeed, this is not restricted to only African countries. Even advanced countries like the USA appear to be vulnerable, as the Mueller report is revealing. Reports on the activities of Cambridge Analytica in the last US elections are also worthy of note. Unfortunately, activities of specialized organizations offering election manipulation services have become commonplace in Africa too. As new media overtakes the traditional mainstream media as the main source of choice for information that influences voter decisions, the role of such organizations is going to become even more crucial. It has become an occupational hazard for persons in public office to have their reputations sullied by anonymous online portals and troll factories. The pervasiveness and persistence of these fake news trolls makes them difficult to effectively respond to. Their anonymity also takes away any possibility of legal recourse. Africa is a diverse continent with many ethnicities, confined into common political boundaries. The role of the underlying law of the land and political leadership must be to include rather than to exclude. Ethnic bigotry is therefore a threat to African democracy. Democracy must seek to include and not exclude. Any overt or covert activity, speech or action that seeks to exclude any part of a national population from fair participation in governance is subversive of democracy. And that is why comments by a senior public official in my country that national leadership should be the preserve for only those from resource-rich regions of Ghana must be condemned by all well-meaning Ghanaians. Insurgency in the Sahel and Savannah are also a growing threat to African democracies, especially in West Africa. Terrorist groups that are determined to disrupt democratic society are increasing activity in the Sahel and Savannah regions of Africa. Democracy cannot thrive in insecurity. Urgent collective action is needed to quell this threat. Already disturbing terrorist activity in Nigeria, Chad, Mali, Niger, Cameroon, Burkina Faso, and Côte d'Ivoire have the potential of spreading and undermining our flourishing democracies. All in all, I would say African democracy is blossoming. It needs to be nurtured. It needs to be consolidated. Africans must accept our new democracies as a way of life. We must create societies that are free, but also disciplined and orderly. Our democracies must seek to create a decent life for our people in a clean environment that works to preserve our planet. In this endeavor, we must all be committed to play our parts. It is only in this way that we can unleash the full potential of our people to create a better society for generations to follow. I thank you very much for your kind attention. Page 13 for
Thank you, Mr. President, for your excellent speech. I will take the privilege of
Give it a notepad and a pen.
sitting beside you to start off the question and answer session. You identified some fundamental problems that African democracies face, and at the same time you concluded by saying that democracy is blossoming in Africa. Are you therefore dismissing those who are arguing that the question of democracy is not settled in Africa yet?
Well, the point I'm making is that we must recognize the successes we have achieved. It is only when you recognize your successes that you can build on it. We have the question of the glass is half full or is half empty. If you see it as half full, then it's easier to fill the glass. If you see it as half empty, then it's more difficult to fill the glass. And so I think that despite the fact that we face major challenges, which I outlined in terms of our electoral systems, in terms of inequality in distribution of the fruits of growth, in terms of poor decentralization, I mentioned all those things. We still must count our blessings and the successes we have so that it makes it easier for us to build on it.
Okay. One of the major challenges to democracy in Africa is the level of poverty in the continent. And related to that is what one errant politician in Nigeria described as stomach infrastructure. For those of you who might not be familiar with this, what it means is that, electorates expect politicians to give them money and food, rather than, build roads and all of that, that if you don't give people money, you have not actually served their purpose. That's what one of them described as stomach infrastructure. And given your own experience in Ghana, I'm familiar with some of the criticism of your time in power, that you were, building roads or hospital, new airport, but you weren't providing stomach infrastructure. I don't think they use that phrase in Ghana. So how would you describe this major challenge in African democracies that, because of poverty, because of attitude, people actually expect that politicians should provide, money, food, and all of that, to be able to encourage people to support them for office?
I believe that if Africa must grow and create a prosperous and decent existence for its people, it must start by putting in the basic social and economic infrastructure. I believe that the all-round development of people is based on having a good quality educational system, is based on having a good health system, is based on having good roads that make it easy to transport goods and people across the country, is based on providing them with clean drinking water, is based on providing them with electricity. These are all things that help develop the human person. But as you said, when they say stomach infrastructure, it means forget about the socioeconomic infrastructure, build the infrastructure in my stomach. And I faced that situation when I was president. We embarked on a quite aggressive rollout of infrastructure in all the sectors. And in many places that I went to campaign during the last election, people told me they don't eat roads or they don't eat hospitals, and that they eat food and they want money in their pockets, And so it is something that has been encouraged over the years by politicians handing out, cash gifts and things to people, such that they don't realize that the overall development of their human person is better guaranteed with the availability of social and economic infrastructure than the handouts that you give them. I mean, there's a saying, teach me how to fish and not give me fish. And so, yes, during elections, people come and distribute fish to you. But after the elections, what do you eat? What do you eat? If you're sick, which hospital do you go to? And so we mustn't give up. We must persist. I believe that robust social infrastructure rollout is beneficial. One, in terms of even job creation. We estimate that in the infrastructure that we're building 200 new secondary schools to expand access to secondary education in our country, because we realized that the 500 and something schools that we had were congested and could not contain all the children. And so a lot of children didn't go to secondary school just because there was not enough space for them. And so we undertook to build 200 new schools so that all children who wanted a secondary education could get one. We undertook to build a hospital in every district so that people didn't have to travel more than a certain distance to reach a good health facility. I think this is the way to go, and we must persist. It also created jobs. In all the infrastructure that we were rolling out, we estimate that we created about 400,000 jobs for masons, engineers, carpenters, steel benders, even the women who sell food at the sites to the workers, earn an income to take back and feed their family. And so that's the multiplier effect that, rolling out infrastructure has. And so we'll persist in building social and economic infrastructure, not in people's stomachs, but in the country to ensure prosperity and development.
Okay, there has been an upsurge in political violence in Ghana with the recent appearance of thugs, called vigilantes. And at the point you even lost your cool and threatened, your opponents of violence for violence. You used to be known as a man of peace. What happened?
I just explain briefly. Over the years, from 1992, when we returned to the fourth Republican democracy and started elections, political parties have had, some kind of people who provide security, for the parties. These used to be called macho men. And really, all they did was go to the gym and pump and build biceps and muscles and intimidate, people and all that. But when they crossed the line, the police rounded them up, went and locked them in custody until after election, the counting was over, and then they'll release them to go. These were small misdemeanors. But sometime from 2015 to 2016, we noticed that one political party had brought people to train these macho men, in martial arts, in weapons handling, and other they were turning from macho men into something like militias. And so it created a disturbing trend, and it all crystallized in what happened in a by-election in a constituency called Ayawaso West Wogong. There was a suspicion that arms or something were in the house of the opposition parliamentary candidate. And so well-armed militia people, they claimed that they were from the SWAT unit of the police, stormed the house ostensibly to search for weapons. Of course, they were resisted by the bodyguards of the MP. And they opened fire, people were injured, and it raised the issue of these vigilantes or militias. And since then, there's been a commission of inquiry which has come out with its report. The government has to issue a white paper on it. It hasn't done so yet. There's also a meeting of the Peace Council by the major political parties to see how these vigilante groups can be disbanded and to create a peaceful environment for elections. But the main concern of the opposition parties is that the government party has absorbed a lot of their militias into the security services. And so they're in the police, they're in the army, they are in national security. And so even if you disbanded, the militias, what do you do with those who have already been absorbed into the security services? And couldn't they be used to create mayhem, when elections come? So these are questions that we're dealing with, but I'm hopeful that with level-headedness, we can achieve, a peaceful outcome and have peaceful elections in 2020.
So you're still in peace?
I was shocked by what I saw. I saw the videos of Ayawaso West Wogong, and I saw the masked men. They were in masks. And when they asked at the Commission of Inquiry, the one who was commanding them said, they wore the mask to prevent mosquito bites. Can you imagine that? So the shock of seeing what happened there, of course, when you speak and you're emotionally charged, I said that we're going to match them boot for boot, but everybody knows my disposition, and so I'd rather have a peaceful outcome than.
Yes, you have been in government before you left as president for a long time. You were in the parliament, you were vice president, you were president. So I have two questions. First, how is life outside power?
It's great.
And
Wale, it's great.
and why do you want to return to office?
I've spent more than 20 years in public office, and I started as a deputy minister, a minister, member of parliament for 3 times, vice president, president. Of course, I served 1 term as president, and after I lost, I started to engage in activities of democratic consolidation, speaking about my time in office and all that. And it's been a fantastic period. I had hoped that my party would select somebody else, but try as I did, I mean, the insistence was that I should run again. I believe in public service. I believe that if you have the talent and you have the ability, you must always place your talent at the disposal of your nation. And so I didn't think it was right to deprive my party of my services if they actually wanted it. And so the party said, okay, you participate in the primaries. We held a presidential primary and there were 7 of us contesting. And of course, the party came back with a resounding endorsement, 95.24% for me to run. And so I took up the challenge, and I hope that we will go into the elections. We expect they should be free and fair. And whatever I can give off to my country again for 1 final term, I'll do so.
But beyond that, it must be nice to be
Beyond that,
president.
I'll continue to work for my country. I'll continue to work for Africa.
But I'm saying it must be nice to be president. Isn't it?
No, it's stressful. If you really, I'm serious. If you really come to the presidency to work, you don't get a night's sleep. My hair was jet black. I mean, this is.
Okay.
And so I'm looking forward to spending time with my family, you know, a more easy life. I'm a very private person. I like my privacy, but once you get into office, I mean, all the protocol, I don't like protocol, too much protocol. All the protocol, where you must sit, where you must pass, security and all that, it can be a bit stressful.
Okay. One last question before I turn it to the audience. You mentioned meeting hackers in the meeting in Abeokuta.
Yes.
What was did you have some discussions with them about?
We did.
Okay.
It was a very, very eye-opening experience for me. We were discussing the use of IT in elections and the disputes that had begun to emerge as a result of the use of IT. And so President Obasanjo, I had a discussion with him and he said, why don't we hold, a forum? I'll host it in my presidential library. And so he sent the invitation and I went. And he had IT experts, he had people from electoral commissions. Myself and Raila Odinga were there. Raila was the candidate in Kenya when I went to observe the elections. He was there. And there were 2 hackers. They actually said, these are hackers. They had certificates in hacking. And they showed how IT systems could be compromised. And they took us through a lot that, I didn't know existed. But it is real. It is real that they're able to hack into a system and be able to bring it down or to extract whatever they want out of it or to achieve whatever outcome they want out of it. And so they also showed us how security of IT systems should be perfected so that they are not able to hack into it, And so it was eye-opening, and President Obasanjo spoke to the ECOWAS. So the ECOWAS is elevating the discussion to a sub-regional level, and they're going to bring people from electoral commissions across the West African sub-region, and then bring some of these people and, have a discussion at that level, and see how we can make our IT systems for elections more secure, so that these little disputes that are beginning to emerge can be eliminated.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. I will now turn it to the audience. We'll take a set of 3 questions first. And please, can you mention your name and if you have an affiliation that's relevant, and then we'll take those first 3 questions. Where is the microphone? Okay. There. All right. Can we start from there? Yes.
Thank you. My name is Oso Echan. I'm a Deputy Communication Officer for NDC UK and Ireland. My question is, during the 2016 elections, the former EC boss did a press conference that the Electoral Commission website had been hacked. I'm taking you back to the US. The same thing happened in the US in this 2016 elections. Now, Mr. President, is there anything that the government, the current government, can talk about this, the Electoral Commission's EC website, especially the national security? As I'm talking to you now, the same elections hasn't been gazetted, and the former EC boss was removed. What are you doing about this situation? Because we have been talking about hacking. So 2020 elections, what are we going to do about it? Thank you.
Okay. Can I take the question here? Well, down here.
My name is Azamati. I read for the MPhil International Relations. Mr. President, if history has any lesson to teach us, it is that we learn from our past mistakes. Those who say democracy is good for us, in the past, were never democratic in their first 60 to 70 years. They have supported and continue to support autocratic regimes, for example, Saudi Arabia, to suppress its own citizens. In their own history, they were not democratic, as I said early on, but when they became democratic, they said everybody should be a democratic country after they had developed. Is democracy an outcome of development, or is a prelude to development? And finally, Mr. President, if I remember your speech correctly, you made a line which was like, the development of an individual's well-being and the welfare of citizens is always important. If it is so important, how on earth should African countries spend huge sums of money rerunning elections, whilst the people we look up to, like the United States and Great Britain, do never rerun elections? For example, in the 2016 elections, it was clear that Hillary Clinton had won the elections, but there was an electoral college. 509 people determined the life and political life of 120 million Americans. Why can't we learn from those who claim democracy is good and do what is best for us? Thank you.
One more question. No, we'll come to this side. Can we have the guy in the sweater?
Thank you very much. My name is Alexander Dufo, a DPhil student in the School of Geography and the Environment. Mr. President, you mentioned a number of things that are, as it were, challenges to the democracy in Africa and Ghana. You mentioned ethnicity. You mentioned recently IT. It seemed to me, though, that before these, especially IT, we had always had these problems with our democracy. Recently, I was listening to one of the clergymen, renowned clergymen in Ghana, the Archbishop Duncan Williams, who had suggested that he's afraid of the rising, as it were, discontent within the youth because they see their compatriots who enter into politics, and within a very short time, they are, as it were, doing well, you know, riding the Porsche cars and the rest of them. Now, he suggests that we probably, as a country, should have a coalition group and then decide that probably for 20, 25 years, we are not going to have, as it were, a presidential elections. We could have parliamentary elections and then define developmental goals for ourselves and have a system of probably rotating the presidency within this coalition. I want to find your thoughts, especially against the backdrop of the question that he posed, whether the sort of democracy, this electoral system that you have mentioned, some of the problems that we are having is necessarily good for us, especially with the growing gap between, the elites and then the masses. And then what's your thought about the 4-year term that we have in Ghana? Your predecessor, President Kufuor, suggested on the eve of his exit that we probably should be thinking about 5 years or 6 years. What are your thoughts? Thanks.
Okay. All right, let me take these three and then we'll probably go another round. Yes, I said in my speech that the Electoral Commissioner announced some time after the vote count that the EC's IT system had been compromised. And I stated that I'm not aware that they have investigated why it got compromised. And at least if they have, they haven't shared those findings with us. And I said that it was important for us to find out, what had happened so that we forestall any dispute around the IT system in the next election, 2020. And so if the EC Commissioner is listening to me, I think that if they have investigated, they should let us know, what compromised the system and what steps are being taken to safeguard the system being compromised again. As far as I'm aware, the absolute results of the presidential elections have been gazetted. But my understanding is that the breakdown by constituencies and polling stations has not been done. We need that to be able to analyze the results in order that we can prepare for the next election. And so we'll urge the EC to gazette the results in totality as quickly as possible so that we have access to it. It's an argument that has continued about autocratic systems and democratic systems. And a lot of the time people point to Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, who was an autocrat, but a benevolent dictator who moved his country progressively. And so people are of the argument that we need a benevolent dictator. People point at Rwanda and say, look, even though freedoms are curtailed, Rwanda is making progress, It depends on how you look at it. I believe that democracies can also make progress. And the progress made in democracies are more sustainable because they are achieved by an interaction of all the people, not because one person says this is good for you. And so if you look at even our history, we had autocratic regimes. We had military dictatorships from 1966 until 1992. What progress did we make? There were times in the 70s when Ghana hit rock bottom under a military dictatorship. And there was the proverbial, joke in Nigeria about a quizmaster who asked in which country they queue for toilet roll, and the guy said Ghana, he says correct for 6 points. We had gone so deep, we couldn't dig further. And so the only way to move was to start coming up. And so we've experienced dictatorships, we've experienced democracy. Ghana has made more progress from 1992 till date than we have done in our previous existence. The economy has grown bigger, people's lives have improved, life expectancy has improved under these same democratic systems than we did under authoritarian regimes. And so I am a Democrat, and I believe that the system can work. It's just that we must have a commitment to it, and we must strengthen the institutions. People are discouraged because the institutions are weak. And so they don't, when you expect, let's say, the judiciary to perform its duty without fear or favor, you find that there's some political manipulation and all that kind of thing. That is what we should be fighting against. And one of the safeguards is to have a free, vibrant, and strong media, to have strong civil society organizations that are free to speak up when things are going bad in society. Unfortunately, sometimes the CSOs go dumb because probably the political dispensation is one that they support. They are political CSOs and all that. But I guess that the progress of the country is the concern of all of us. And so all of us must ensure that that happens. With regards to the same question about democratic systems, and what system we should adopt. Ghana is using a presidential system. We call it a bit of a hybrid because majority of the ministers in the executive must come from parliament. And so there's not that strict separation of the executive and parliament. People have advocated that if you are appointed a minister, you must abdicate your seat and, have a by-election so that there'll be a strict separation between parliament and the executive. I support that because I think that parliament has responsibility of oversight on the executive. And normally when you have this incestuous relationship between the executive and parliament, then that's oversight role is compromised. Right now, everybody in parliament wants to be appointed a minister. And so they know the executive is looking at you. If you oppose the executive or you don't do the executive's bidding, your chances of becoming a minister or deputy minister are zero. And so if there is a motion you don't agree with, you still have to vote for it because Big Brother is watching you. And, so I think that we must separate the executive and parliament. If you run for parliament, be a member of parliament. If you're appointed by the executive because they think you're suitable to be a minister, abdicate your seats and let somebody run for it and do that parliamentary duty. A system of consensus building. There are parliamentary systems and presidential systems. There are systems where if a by-election, an election is called, the government can be dissolved. And once you run the election again, the party that has the biggest number enters into coalition with others. People believe that that is a good system because it leads to consensus building. And all manner of parties with different ideologies must come together to be able to get the majority in parliament to form the government. It has its advantages. The presidential system too has its advantages. Our constitution drafters, gave us the presidential system. If it's something that we need a national discourse on, we should do it and determine if we must amend the constitution or whatever. But I think that so far our constitution has worked for us. Ghana has made progress. We just need, we just need to tweak things and make sure that institutions are working and are strong, and that people who abdicate their responsibility or are engaged in malfeasance are punished, not after the regime has left government, but during the period of the regime. We tried to do that. There were scandals that came up while we were in government, and I told the investigative agencies to go ahead and investigate them. And if people were found to have involved themselves in any malfeasance, to be punished. And so we need to continue doing that. We must not get tired. We must keep fighting. I believe that all these countries that reach where they are, they not have it easy. And so we cannot expect that we'll just have an easy ride, into development. We just have to persevere.
Okay. Can we take another side?
And then 4-year term,
okay.
I believe, I agree with President Kufuor. I think a 5-year term is better. First year, you are elected, you're forming your government. Before you have settled you are in your second year, third year, fourth year, you're fighting an election. So essentially, you have just 2 years to work, and it makes it difficult.
Okay. Can we have the lady at the back?
Thank you very much. Mr. President, thank you. My name's Heather Maggs. I'm a PhD student at Reading University, and in December I caught a bus from Wa to Navrongo. On the grand scheme of things, this is a very, very small detail, but I promised the friends I was with who were helping me with my PhD that if I ever got this opportunity, I would ask if the infrastructure of the road from Wa to Navrongo could possibly be bumped up the list. And I never thought I would ever have this opportunity to. So I'm sorry, for my friends in Ghana,
yes.
I have to ask this question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Ruma in front here.
Thank you, Your Excellency. My name is Arum Ote, and I'm an executive in residence at the Said Business School and an academic scholar at the Africa Center and St. Anthony's College. I have 3 questions, and I'll make them quick. The 2 of them are not personal, and 1 is personal. So I'll start with the one that's the least personal. You talked at the beginning of your speech about the transition in the Charter for the African Union about intervening into states. And you gave the example of what happened with the Gambia, which you were involved in personally. And I think all of you used the African way to try and encourage the then president to exit power, but it didn't work. But I'm a bit more focused on what's happening in Venezuela and some of your views about it, because it's almost like a halfway house. The international community is there, but not there. What is your opinion, and what is it, from your experience, that you feel should be the way that the international community should respond in terms of being a good neighbor, but not taking over the house? The second question I have relates to the power of incumbency and the cost of elections, which was some of what was coming out of the earlier question. So you are one of the leaders that was seen to have accepted not to contest the elections or the result of the elections. And what I found is where the leader, it's unusual to have leaders who don't contest the elections. So how do you see the power of incumbency and the cost of elections, particularly for an outsider?
Okay.
And the personal one is, what would you do differently if you got elected? Now, you've had some time to reflect on the last time that you were president.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Can we have the lady in front here? At the back, rather.
Okay. My name is Moji Abasa, an alumni of Wycliffe Hall, Oxford University. I see you've got a very strong relationship with Nigeria, which is the biggest democracy in Africa. I'd really like to have your candid opinion about the recent presidential election, which was cancelled, I think, less than 24 hours to the actual date, which they had 4 years to plan for. The terrible violence, the killings, just to have your thoughts on that.
The guy at the back, please. Yes. Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I have two questions. My name is Yao, and I'm a lecturer with the University of Reading. So the first question is your thoughts on the winner-takes-all situation that is quite common in a lot of African countries, and how that threatens democracy. And the second bit is you also highlighted the importance or the role that the media plays in our democratic consolidation. Following events in Ghana in recent times, I've noticed a section of the people talking about Ghana going back to the dark days, where there's a culture of silence in the media. What are your thoughts on Ghana's current situation, and how do you think that threatens the democracy of Ghana going forward?
Can you please, and yes, lady, yes.
Oh, hello. My name is Beatrice Asante. I'm the North London chairperson in this country. With me, I think my issue is more to do with accountability, that when governments come in, no matter what anybody does, they always keep saying they're doing things they're going through a process, and nothing happens. People take money and they get away with it. And secondly, continuity. When things are done, the hospitals are built, when roads are done, when other governments come, they don't actually continue what happens. And I find that that's wastage of money. And secondly, we've got electricity, we've got sun in Ghana. In this country, they don't have that much sun, but they use the solar energy. Why do we waste so much money on getting other things into the country whereby we can use our natural resources?
Thank you. Yes, please go ahead.
All right. Let me take it quickly. Maybe I'll start with the one Avrongo Road. That road connects the capital of two regions of Ghana, the Upper West region and the Upper East region. And it's been in a bad shape for a long time. During my time, we started engineering the road. There was a major bridge that we needed to put. I was vice president at the time. We built the bridge so that it improved the connection between the two regions. And then we started the process of engineering the road and putting a bituminous surface on it. Work was ongoing when we left office. My understanding is that that work has come to a standstill. And it links to the question she gave, that when a new government comes, projects that were initiated by the previous ones are abandoned And then, of course, the new government has its own priorities, so it starts doing something else. And that is part of the bane of democracy that we have. There's no continuity in planning and development. And so it's something that we need to deal with. If we can have a priority investment program that is accepted by all political stakeholders, and we say that over the next 10 years, these are the investment projects in infrastructure we want to see, then it means that whether any government comes or goes, that program continues. It's something that we can put on the table. She says, why we have so much sunlight, why are we not using more solar? It's possible to use solar now because the prices have come down. Before, solar was very expensive. And of course, in the night when the sun is not shining, you don't have as much power. And so that was a hindrance to deploying solar. But now with the falling prices of solar, we have two systems, off-grid, where we're allowing companies to go to communities that are far from the transmission grid to use solar solutions for them. These are communities that have very low power factors. They have a single TV set, they have a light bulb so that the children can do their homework at night. They have a small fridge or something. And so it's possible to put a solar panel on their roof and provide them with power. Now you can link it to a prepaid unit. And so they buy the credit like they buy for their phones, and they just input the number and it switches on the power for them. So there are a lot of possibilities with that now. There are also hybrid systems where we're encouraging house owners to put solar onto their residences and link it to the national grid. And so in the afternoon, when the sun is shining brightly and more solar is being generated, it cuts down the amount of power you take from the national grid. And then in the night, the national grid takes over. And so it reduces your electricity bill. And a lot of people are realizing that and are beginning to go for that option. So it's becoming fashionable, and I'm sure that it will continue to increase. Accountability, this is what I talked about. Accountability should not be post-regime accountability, that you hide your grafts and corruption and you refuse to investigate it and only wait till you've left for the next government to come and do it. And so in our time, we started to prosecute, any cases that came up. Indeed, one of the members of parliament on my side, belonging to my party, is in jail for some malfeasance that took place. It went to court and he was jailed. And so I believe that if you're a president and issues of corruption come up, you must deal with them. There are some presidents, and there was one of our previous presidents who said that he will not investigate corruption and bring down his government, because it is believed that the more you expose and investigate corruption, the more the perception that your government and yourself are corrupt. But it's like sweeping every day and sweeping the dirt under your carpet. I mean, one day you'll hardly be able to walk on it because all the dirt on the carpet will make it so bumpy. And so it's better to clean it out and persevere in doing that, and we'll continue to do so. We talked about dark days for the media, and I'm sure he's referring to the incident that happened yesterday or the day before yesterday, where 2 radio stations were closed down, pro-opposition radio stations. I mean, armed policemen were sent there and shut down the radio stations, ostensibly because they had not renewed their licenses. And it happened at a time when the opposition was doing a major press conference, and these stations were carrying the press conference live. And so at that moment, the radio stations were attacked and closed down. And when the authorities who closed it down were asked, they said, oh, it had nothing to do with the press conference. It was just a coincidence that they were shut down at the time the press conference was taking place. But I believe that the role of a regulator is to build, not to destroy. And so if they haven't renewed their licenses, it's your duty to remind them you haven't renewed your licenses. And eventually you must even give them notice and give them a deadline. Say, if you don't renew it by this date, we'll shut you down. If you've done all that and the correspondence is available and you show it to anybody, people will understand. But then the point is, there are more than 300 radio stations in Ghana. Why those 2? And those are the leading opposition stations. And so you definitely, I mean, you don't need to be a clairvoyant to know that, I mean, definitely there were political reasons behind the closure of those stations. And so it's unfortunate. The president has prided himself in being a human rights campaigner, and I don't think that things like this should be happening under his watch. Quickly, winner takes all is related to democratic systems, like I said. Often, if you have a parliamentary system where you have to build coalitions to be able to govern, then it means that when you build a coalition, all the parties in the coalition take part. But we have a presidential system where it's first past the post. And if one party wins, I mean, they have absolute monopoly for 4 years. And so you have to cool your heels and wait and hope that the electorate will smile on you at the next election. And when you have two dominant parties, the partisanship becomes a bit extreme. And so it makes it difficult for people on the other side of the divide to accept appointments, even if they were offered by the incumbent side. And so those are some of the problems we face. If you have a dominant party and weaker parties, then it probably makes it an easier option. But for now, that's the system we have. I cannot comment on the Nigerian elections because I was not an observer there. And everything I've read is in the media. And I'm a social media buff. A lot of stories there are fake. I don't know if they are true. I'm not going to make any judgment based on what I've read on the social media. But we saw all kinds of things. They showed pictures of soldiers walking into polling stations and taking ballot boxes and things. I don't know if they are true. And so I don't want to hazard any opinion. I hear the matter is in court. And so let's let the justices sift through the evidence and decide what needs to be done. Incumbency and cost of elections. They used to say incumbency advantage, but there's also an incumbency disadvantage. You know, you run the economy, you run the country, you know what is possible and what is not possible. Your opposition can be very reckless, like I saw in 2016. They promise heaven, you know, and say, so when we come, we'll build a factory in every district. We'll build a dam in every village. We'll give every constituency $1 million every year. I mean, I manage the economy. I can't make that kind of promise. And so I said, oh, they're lying. They can't do it, you know. But it sounds sweet in the ear. And so, of course, you get voted out. And what can you do? You just hope that people will see through. And so now people are asking, where are the factories? And people are asking, where are the dams? Where's the $1 million, you know? And it's a democratic learning experience for us. So incumbency has its advantages. I mean, as president, you are your person is the responsibility of the state to protect you. And so you have to ride in a government car. You must have all these police and soldiers guarding you and all that. And so somebody might enjoy it and say it's an advantage, and the state fuels the vehicles and all that. But on the other side too, I mean, people in Africa are in a hurry. And in a year or two, they don't see much happening. They start to make up their minds. I had a particularly difficult period. We had an energy crisis. I had to pay attention to try and resolve it, managed to resolve it by the end of 2015. So 2016, power stabilized. I had an economy that had a wage spiral. 73% of total tax revenues was going into paying 600,000 public sector workers. That's the economy I inherited. And so I needed to do reforms to change that. By the time I left office, we had brought that down to about 53%. And so it freed up other resources to be able to do some of the infrastructure development that we did. You know, so those things are not, you're not able to turn around and make it visible in a 4-year period for people to understand. What will I do differently? I'll communicate better. I mean, we need to let the people understand what the reality is. And so I think that we assumed that people knew what we were doing. And so we did not take our case to the people the way we should have. And so I believe I'll make myself more available to the media. I'll try and explain, you know, what I'm trying to achieve. And I mean, if the people buy in, I think they'll understand. Cost of elections. There is actually an analysis going on cost of elections in Africa. They're too expensive. Yeah, the budgets are too expensive. We need to look at the procurement systems and see how we can cut down the cost. If you look at the cost per voter in terms of how much we spend on elections, it's much higher than many places in Asia and South America and others. And so I know that the ECOWAS and the other sub-regional bodies are doing an analysis of cost of elections and seeing how our electoral commissions can bring down these costs so that it makes democracy cheaper. I mean, in our final year, that's one of what affected our budget, because we're doing an IMF program, and IMF did not allow us to make any provision for running elections that year. And then we're slapped with like 1.7 billion budget for elections alone. And so it dislocated the budget that we had prepared and then pushed the deficit higher than we had anticipated. So these are things that we need to look at. In Gambia, the elections had been declared, and Yahya Jammeh had accepted and called his opponent and congratulated him. And then a week later, he says, no, I don't concede, and I won't go. I will contest the elections. So the sub-regional body set up a mission, and I was part of that mission to go and persuade him. And he was totally adamant. Whatever we said, he refused to accept. And so we did 2 missions into the Gambia, and he didn't accept to concede the election. And so there was an ECOWAS meeting. What happens is, when I talked about non-indifference based on the AU Charter and what happens in other countries, the check on it is that you must have a mandate. You cannot just go in. The sub-regional body or the continental body must give you a mandate that allows you to go in. And so that mandate was secured. And then Senegalese troops and Ghanaian troops were asked to go in and enforce the will of the people. Luckily, they went in, they camped on the outskirts of Banjul, and then negotiation continued. We withdrew, we those who were on the earlier team, and then President Alpha Condé and the president of Mauritania, who are close to Yahya Jammeh, were asked to go and finish the final negotiation, and they negotiated, and he decided to go into exile. There was something funny that happened. On one of the trips, we took the president-elect out because he expressed fear for his life. And he had complained of the soldiers harassing him. And so we went to the president, to explain to him that, the president-elect was in fear for his life and that soldiers had surrounded his house. Then he said, oh, well, I know you, this international community, if even a fly, settles on him, you say, I caused it. And so I need to protect him to make sure nothing happens to him because you blame me. And then I said, but Mr. President, the soldiers, if they were protecting him, they'll be facing the opposite direction. But the soldiers' guns were facing the man's house. And instead of facing anybody coming to harm the man, the soldiers were rather, face, when he opens any window, he sees guns pointing at him, And so, that's part of, what happens. But we're happy it was resolved. And we hope that Gambia would continue to be stable and democratic.
Thank you very much. We actually have gone beyond our time, but let me, on behalf of the Said Business School and the African Studies Center and the Africa Business Alliance, thank Mr. President for coming here. There's something that I think it's important for us to emphasize. Last year, the Africa Society, that's a group of African students in Oxford, hosted the current president. So we are hosting the past president and perhaps future president again, which is an expression of our fairness in the next election in Ghana.
Your neutrality.
So please, Tammy. Oh, okay. Yes. So on behalf of the Said Business School and the African Studies Center, I want to present this gift to Mr. President. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I please ask you to remain in the hall as we lead the president out? And please, for one more time, let's give a round of applause to the president.